couple helpful tips for all of you that we hope you can walk away with. But this is really just going to be an overview. So please don't worry if we go too fast. Also, as you just heard, we're recording this, so you'll be able to look at it again. And both Shay and I are here. You can see our emails right there at the bottom. Are always here to answer questions. And please don't hesitate, once again, to put any questions you have in the chat section.
I'd love to kick this off by actually starting with everybody to put a question in the chat section. So if you could put kind of why you're here today, if there was a particular question that you were hoping that we would answer, or maybe you don't own any investment properties and you're kind of thinking about it and you're a little nervous. So if you could just put in the chat box what brought you here today, and if you have any particular questions that you're hoping that we will answer for you. We have kind of a whole host of things that we're going to go over today, but we want to make sure we really tailor this to you. So please put those in the chat box as we get started. So I am Shay Hata. This is David with the Buy, Sell, Love Chicago team. We are residential realtors here in the Chicagoland area. And we are going to be talking to you today about buying an investment property 101. And we speak from experience because we own investment properties. And obviously we help a lot of our clients buy investment properties as well. So we're going to talk to you about how we help them buy investment properties, but we're also going to talk to you about our experience as investment property owners, kind of on a personal level. So David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is David Vodage, and I'm lucky enough to work with Shay Hata. Between the two of us, we have over 20 years of experience with residential real estate in Chicago, and we've lived in different neighborhoods and sold in different neighborhoods. So at this point, probably there isn't a building that we haven't either seen or been into, we think, in most of the city. So I think that's a lot of expertise. Shay is an amazing sort of organized systems person. You'll see from her level of organization. The thing that I think I bring to it, I'm a pretty quantitative person. My background is in economics from the University of Chicago. So I tend to be a little bit more of the quant person on the team, although Shay has really strong numbers. So that's kind of what we bring. So we're going to kick it off, I think, here and just sort of get into why should you buy an investment property? I already see people putting in here, some thoughts, sort of looking at it. People have all kinds of reasons for buying investment property. Obviously, income is an important aspect of it, but people have short-term, long-term goals. Right now, I'm 50 years old. So I'm looking at investment properties. I'm not super attuned to my cash flow at this point. I'm looking for sort of long-term investments. I know Shay she's has more investment properties than I have. She looks a little more from a immediate cash flow sense. So some people, it's sort of short-term goals, some it's long-term goals. Real estate is a huge part of our economy, obviously. For most people, their primary residence is their biggest investment. 60% of wealth transfer in this country is through real estate. So it's a huge part of our nation's wealth. So in terms of taking care of yourself and also possibly, taking care of helping out children, investment properties expands that. If you've got your 401k all in equities, obviously part of that is in the real estate market, but it's another way to diversify your investments and and sort of your financial profile. People have a lot of different ways they approach things and what they're looking for in their goals. And we're always happy to go through this. The first step in looking at your investment, and I think it's important to write it down. Why am I buying this investment property? Because you want to make sure when you come to looking at a property, is it in line with what that goal is? And that may change, and hopefully it's important to be clear on why you're buying.
I think, also it helps to kind of hear our journeys. For me, I got into being a landlord really on accident. We bought our first home in 2008, my husband and I, kind of at the height of the market before everything crashed. And then in 2012, when my husband took a job in Chicago and we needed to move, our property was upside down. It was worth $80,000 less than we owed on it at that point, because that's when everything was crashing. It was like 2011, 2012. And so, for us, it didn't make sense to sell it and take an $80,000 loss. It made more sense to hold on to it and rent it out. And I realized I really love being a landlord. My husband hates it, so I handle everything to do with our investment properties, but I really like it. And I realized that it is such a great way to build wealth, because all I have to have is the money for the down payment and then, money for some incidentals that come up. And over time, that tenant is going to pay off the balance of the loan if I'm holding the properties long-term and build up a lot of equity. And hopefully over time, that property appreciates as well. So for me, that first one was kind of a light bulb moment of, hey, as a realtor, I don't have any sort of 401k through an employer or pension or anything like my husband has. I really need to build my own retirement portfolio. And I have things invested in the stock market. I buy crypto, I have precious metals, things like that. I'm pretty well diversified. And I wanted real estate to be one of those diversification methods for me, right? So essentially, my husband and I started buying 1 to 2 properties a year. We've even kind of expanded it beyond that. So when our son was born, we bought a property essentially for him in our name, and that is going to be his college fund. We do 15-year loans on all the properties that we buy. And so by the time he goes to college, that property will be completely paid off. All we had to do was the down payment. And then we can either use that money coming in, which on that property, we charge $3,500 a month, to cash flow paying for his college. Or right now that property is worth about $525,000. We could sell that property by the time he goes to college, and it would probably entirely pay for his college career, right? Or maybe medical school, depending on what he wants to do, right? So that was really how we looked at properties. And now we're really looking at them for our retirement. So our goal is to have $20,000 a month net coming in from our properties when we retire, so that we can use that money to live on a daily basis and not have to draw down as much on our retirement portfolio that's in the stock market, crypto, et cetera, right? So we've been slowly acquiring properties to get that to that $20,000 a month net threshold. So, I think there's a lot of different strategies. Is it that you want to try to pay for your child's college? Is it that you want to try to pay for retirement? Do you want to do a short-term flip to try to have immediate cash coming in, right? Those are harder, I think, in today's markets because our prices have gotten so high to do those short-term flips. We're not seeing nearly as many of those, but there's a lot of different reasons, as David said, in terms of why you want to buy an investment property. And if you're thinking of buying one, and you're just not sure about it, give us a call and we're happy to kind of sit down and work those numbers through with you and see if they make sense. So let's jump right into kind of how's the market. So it's been a very interesting market with COVID, right? When COVID started, we felt like the sky was falling. We didn't know if we were going to be able to pay our bills. Who knows if anyone's ever going to buy or sell a house or even leave their house ever again, right? Obviously that changed, and we found that the pandemic really spurred the housing market forward because most people realized the type of housing that they needed changed. They needed a lot more space, they needed outdoor space, et cetera. So for our investors in particular, we saw a lot less flip opportunities in the Chicagoland market in general because prices, especially for single families and townhouses, went up a lot because those became very desirable because people wanted more space. On the flip side, what we saw was that there was a great opportunity for investors to buy 1-bedroom condos because nobody wanted a 1-bedroom condo over the past year, especially in the Loop, because people wanted more space. And because they weren't commuting into work and they were telecommuting, they felt like they didn't need to be downtown in the Loop anymore to have a quick commute to work. So what we're seeing is buyers are willing to move farther away from the downtown with the idea that they're only going to have to commute in once or twice a week. And so there's been fantastic opportunities for our investors in the 1-bedroom housing condo market over the past year where they can get those properties for below market value. We're starting to see that shift a little bit as people are starting to come back to the city a little bit. So there's still good opportunity in the 1-bedroom market, but not quite as many. If you're looking at townhomes and single family homes, you're going to expect that those are going to sell quickly for over asking price. So that makes it harder to find a good investment property because those numbers aren't as good as they were in the past. Where there is opportunity as an investor is with properties that need rehab work, because we're seeing buyers don't want to buy something that is not updated, completely move-in ready for 2 reasons. One, they don't have the cash to do the renovations that are required. Right now, it's expensive to do renovations because there's a labor shortage and a supply shortage, and they don't want people in their property with COVID bringing COVID germs into the property. So if you're handy or if you have cash to do renovations, those are properties that are tending to sit on the market a little bit longer. And so those can be some good investment opportunities as well. David, I don't know if you want to add on to that one at all.
No, I think that's totally the case. You know, it's Shay and I had some buyers this beginning of this week who were ready to they were ready to do a renovation, and they possibly might have been a good investment for them. We just went through the availability of materials and stuff. It's a really tricky time. Shay, if you want to flip through the next, just kind of showing where things are and what we're talking about here when we talk. In general, we're going to be talking about sort of the great Chicago metro area. You know, there are all kinds of submarkets, but you look at here, you know, you look at closed listings have kind of been slowing down a little bit. The end of the year was a little bit slower than historically. It was busier than it usually has been. But if you look at closed listings, it's sort of through the fall, there was sort of a trickling down. So things have happened. But now if we look at sort of up what's going on sort of the next week, we've started off the week with the year with a bang. So we have the first 2 weeks, both the first week and the second week have, despite the fact that COVID is going on, contracts are up, which neither Shay or I expected. So that's been sort of interesting. You know, people are out there. I think part of it's been driven by interest rates. People are like, you know, interest rates are going up. I should go out and buy. However, and if we go to the last one, I think here, the new listings inventory is definitely down, and thus far. But you know what? These are the beginning of the year. You know, statistics are kind of tricky to look at. The last 2 years with COVID, it's sort of hard to tell. But in terms of the market, I don't know if we get this question, I don't know, 15 times a day. The market, there are always opportunities in the market. It's just as it takes a little bit more to find it. However, if you're going to be holding for the long term, you have a little more opportunity here. I think Shay and I tend to take a longer hold approach to investment properties. You know, you may pay, let's say, $10,000 more for a multifamily, but the interest rates right now, and Shay's going to talk about this in a little bit. If the interest rates are lower now than they might be sort of in 2 years, that could end up your monthly payments could be a lot less. So there are definite trade-offs. So, and that brings us into, in terms of how much money you're going to need to put down on an investment property. It depends. If you're owner occupying a property, there's flexibility. So there's 2 ways that you can have an investment property. It could be something, you could be buying a 2-flat, a 3-flat, and you'll be owner occupying that. There are programs you can buy. You can definitely don't have to be at that 20% amount. What's the lowest you've seen lately, Shay, for people buying with a multi?
3.5%. You know, if they're going to owner occupy one of the units and rent out the other units. That said, if you are a physician or you are a vet, there are 0% down loan programs for those 2 special categories of people as well. So, you know, you could put down as low as 3.5%, depending on the purchase price, in order to buy a multifamily property. If you are going to be buying a straight investment property, which is what I tend to do, then typically you're looking at a minimum of 20% down, and to get a better interest rate, 25% down. So that would be a situation where you're not going to be living in that property at all, and you are just renting it out to other people. So, you know, that's really going to depend on if you're living there or not living there, how much money you need. And then you're also going to need money for closing costs on top of that. So in addition to your down payment, you're going to need to pay for the inspector, the attorney to represent you, the title fees, the transfer tax stamps, all of those things. In the Chicagoland area, those closing costs tend to be about 2% of the purchase price. So you need to add that amount onto your down payment to get a rough ballpark of exactly how much money you would need to buy an investment property. And that brings us into interest rates. So what's going on with interest rates? They've started going up in the last week or 2. And what we are hearing from all the lenders that we work with. So our friend Chad Lubin, who is a lender at Cross Country Mortgage, gave us these rates earlier today. You know, they are starting to go up quite a bit. I bought an investment property in the fall, and my interest rate for that was right around 3. I can't remember if it was 2.85 or 3.125, but it was somewhere right around there for a 15-year loan. Right now, 30-year owner occupied, without points, you're looking at almost 4% if it's a 2 to 4 unit property. If that's a 1 unit property, those are hovering about 3.75 without paying any points. And when we say paying points, that typically means paying some additional money to get the interest rate lowered a little bit. Okay, so that would be if you're owner occupying the property. If you are buying a straight out investment property, With a point for a 30-year fix, that can be 4.125 right now. Without a point, it can be up to 4.75. This really depends on your credit score and how long you are locking the loan for. So for instance, and as I said, in the fall, I bought a property right around 3%. Right now I'm buying a new construction townhouse. I have to do a long lock. So I'm having to do a 9-month lock because we don't know when that's going to be done. And my interest rate is like 4.25, somewhere right around there. So a lot higher than I paid last fall. And our concern is that those interest rates are going to continue to rise over the course of the year. So we've been telling all of our clients, buyers or investors, you're better off getting under contract now because you're going to pay less than you would pay come summer or come fall. David, anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, and these rates, I just want to point out, these are for conventional loans, which are, there might be other products out there. You might have a special thing, you might have, in terms of, but this is in terms of conventional loans. The thing about that, one nice thing that's happened this year, especially with rising home prices, those limits have really increased. For a single family home, when you're looking at almost $650,000. If you go up to a 4-unit home, it's 1 point for your, excuse me, you're now over $1.2 million. So it's right now, these have changed. So that's been one thing that's really good. An important thing to remember about that is interest is deductible. So these are things that, a good lender is always important in a purchasing process. It's even more important in investment property. And that takes us to our next point. Is sort of how do you analyze the financials of an investment property? So many ways. There are so many different approaches that people take to do this. And part of it has to do with your goals. There are some people who want to make sure that from day one, they're deriving an income from that property. And that it's essential that from day one, they're making that. We've had clients, oftentimes they tend to be professional folks like attorneys or doctors. They just want to park their money somewhere. And as long as something doesn't cost them, essentially, or they're just supplementing a little bit, they don't care. So it really depends. If you go into the next page, I think we've kind of a couple of the different ways you can. Probably the easiest way to do it is you think of the gross rent multiplier. What you're basically doing is you're taking the income that you get each month and putting it as a ratio of what your purchase price is. So let's say you're buying a $100,000 property and you get $1,000 rent. That's sort of that 1% rule. That would be a gross rent multiplier of 100. That's 100 times your rent. So that would be 1% rule. We do not get that in the city a lot. That is you tend to find that in, you just don't find it in the city. I mean, just in terms of prices right now, I mean, they do exist within the city. I think you tend to get it in neighborhoods that are not going to have as many amenities, public transport. The neighborhoods may not just be as appealing in terms of condition and things like that. But in Chicago, but it's sort of a good quick back of envelope. Sort of go to the other extreme is cash flow, and you could do an analysis. And what you do is you take your property and you go through. The more information you have, the better you're going to do the property. I mean, you're going to want to know what the utility bills are. What are your insurance? What's your water? You're going to want to have an allowance for vacancy, because properties don't always have tenants. Someone may move out early. Or you may not rent right away because you try to increase the rent. So you need to sort of work that. So that's a cash flow analysis. That's sort of the other extreme. The more data you have for that, the better your analysis is on that. But that's sometimes trickier. So when going to look at a property, the more questions you ask, and hopefully the person who's selling it, the broker, is going to have that information. And then something you hear a lot about is the cap rate. And what that does is you take your net operating income, and so you take what you're basically netting each month, and you divide that by the value of the property. So that's sort of a ratio of, and you take that for the year, and you're just looking, a lot of people like to be, in some markets, they like to be up at 8%, 9%, 10%. In Chicago, we tend to be at about 2 to 3% of your value. Your net income is about 2% of your value. So it's a little bit trickier. Taxes are higher. There are a lot of things going in there. Shay's going to tell you in a second about the way she looks at properties. The whole point here being there are a lot of different ways to look at property. It's all going to go back to question one: what are my goals? Why am I buying this property? And one thing to remember is one thing that also is, what are the tax implications? We are not tax professionals here. There are a lot of expenses here that you're able to deduct. So not only are you able, depending on your tax situation, and you want to talk to your tax preparer about this, you're going to be able to improve. You're not just interest is going to be able to be deducted. Your costs in part when you're searching for a property, a lot of things. So a lot of times on paper, a property may actually lose cash in a month, but by the time you look at the cash benefit, the tax benefit of it, you're actually ahead for the year. There's one thing, and we can talk about this a little bit more at the end, is depreciation. In terms of accounting for properties, depreciation is basically, you think that each year, the value of property decreases because it needs to be for capital improvements. It's, the government requires that you do that. You get to deduct that. So these are really fast. Shay, how do you look at properties?
Yeah, so as David said, it's really hard to get the gross rent multiplier, kind of the 1% rule in the Chicagoland area. We have some of the highest property taxes in the country, and our prices are high. So that's a very hard metric to meet in Chicago. Cap rate, as he said, when you're figuring out the cap rate, you take that net, you divide it by the purchase price, and then you have to move the decimal over 2 places to figure out what that percentage is. As he said, a lot of people will come to us and say they want a 10% cap rate in Chicago, and that's typically impossible. Our cap rate here is much, much lower. That doesn't mean that they're not good investment properties. It's just different because our properties are more expensive and our property taxes and HOA fees tend to be more expensive. So I do what I call the Shay special. This is how I've always evaluated properties. We put down 20 or 25% for our down payment, and then we always get a 15-year loan. And what I am looking at is, can I charge more in rent than the 15-year loan by a couple $100s a month, so that I have enough money left over after we paid the property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, the mortgage, to cover any needs that the property has. So repairs, maintenance, things like that, pest management, if it's a single family house, mowing the lawn, shoveling the snow. So I want to make sure I can cover all of those expenses and have an extra maybe $200-300 a month to go into kind of a savings fund for any bigger purchases that come up, like a new refrigerator, something like that. So I don't know of anybody else who evaluates properties like that, but that is what works for me and my family. So when I find a property that matches those metrics, I buy it. And I know in 15 years, it will be paid off. And that net amount of money that I get from that is going to go towards that total of $20,000 a month that I want to have coming in from my investment properties to pay for our retirement. So, as David said, there are a lot of different ways to evaluate properties. You have to figure out what makes sense for you and what works in your market. In other markets, I own some investment properties in Nashville. There you can get the 1% rule, right? That's not feasible in Chicago. So you just have to figure out what makes sense for you and what makes sense for that particular market. So that's going to bring us to the next question of, what type of investment property should I buy? So again, I feel like we're saying that depends, but that is really the case for a lot of these questions. So first, I think you have to decide, are you going to try to flip a property? Because if you're going to try to flip a property, your best property to flip is a single family house. That's going to give you the most possibility for appreciation, because condos and townhouses, no matter how nice you make the inside, you're often capped by what the other properties in the complex sell for, right? So if you're going to do a flip, you're probably looking at single family houses. Then you have to decide, are you going to do a short-term rental or a long-term rental? I prefer long-term tenants, meaning that I'm looking for leases to be a minimum of 1 year. I don't personally like doing short-term Airbnb properties. To me, it's a lot of hassle. I'm a mom of a 5-year-old. I don't want to be getting phone calls all the time that somebody, can't get into the property. They can't use the code. They ran out of toilet paper. The cleaner didn't show up, right? So if you have the appetite for that, that can be a great way to make money, because you can typically charge a higher price per night and make more money each month than you would just straight renting that property out. You have to be careful though, because a lot of places are not allowing short-term rental properties. We recently had a client who bought a short-term rental property in Deerfield. It was doing really well. It was this famous pie house, this pie-shaped property. She had it and it was doing great. It was always rented. And then Deerfield decided they didn't want to have short-term rentals anymore, passed a law saying that. And so she was forced to sell it. So you have to look at what the rules are for the city or neighborhood or village, and if there's any talk of outlawing those, because that could very well change your plan. So if you're going to buy a short-term rental property, I think the numbers also have to make sense for a long-term rental property in case you end up not being able to Airbnb it out and have to hold on to it long-term. Otherwise, if you're looking for a long-term investment property where you're renting it out for a minimum of a year, then you've got condos and townhouses. What I like about those is that you don't have to take care of the exterior maintenance. So especially if you're a first-time investor, I think those are a great way to get your feet wet. And all you have to worry about is interior repairs and maintenance that needs to get done, but you don't have to worry about getting somebody to shovel the snow, right? And you're going to know if your tenant is having a wild, loud party because your neighbors are going to call and tell you. So there's a little bit of oversight there for you. Otherwise, you can look at buying a single family home or what we call a fee simple property, which would be like a townhouse, where you're responsible for all of the exterior maintenance, the roof, the windows, the snow shoveling, the landscaping, similar to a single family. Those are more complicated if you're going to be an investor because they're more expensive because you're in charge of all the exterior maintenance. But the nice side thing about those is those typically have better appreciation, single family houses and fee simple townhouses, than properties like condos and townhouses that are part of a condo association. So I think the question you have to ask yourself is, what am I going for? Am I going for making this as easy on me as possible? If so, maybe start with something that's part of an HOA. Or are you okay doing more work and being more involved and you're really looking for more appreciation? Then you might want to go for a single family house, something like that. David, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, because I think flips right now, and I just want to add, it's really not the time to do it. You have to be, unless you are a professional with contractor abilities and resources, it's next to impossible to get things done. And who knows where by the time the market comes in. So unless you're a very special case, Shay and I would not even do it right now. Even though we have resources, we know it's going to be hard to get. And also just remember, a lot of the due diligence that you're using with any kind of property, it's going to be the same as if you're buying a primary residence. You just need to look at a couple different things and longevity. But it's, the thing is, as Shay said, if a condo is a good thing, in terms of getting started, you'd have to deal with like less the exterior, the snow, especially, this is a big thing in Chicago. The more control you have of the situation, the more responsibility. So that oftentimes is the higher upside in terms of profit. So that it's just going to be, it's the trade-off. The easier it is on you, the better. And location also matters too. I think that's something we want. If it's something you can get to, Shay has properties, but she knows people who can depend on. So a lot of factors to look at, including. So features, as I was saying here, you're going to take the same features that you would have if you were living there. I mean, just always think of yourself as a tenant. Shay mentioned 1 bedrooms before. Those are much tougher to rent in terms of, if you have a 2-bedroom, you have a roommate who might have a single person working at home, or families. You have a much wider market. Like a 2-bed, 2-bath is a really nice combination. So you look at sort of what is going to rent the fastest is probably the most important. So sort of that lowest common denominator is important. Condition in terms of maintenance. I mean, the less you have, the better. It's very important. Just in terms of, if what you always want to look at, if a property, because it's nice when you're buying property that's already an investment property, a condo or something, you look at the rent and see how things have sold and rented in the building. Quick rentability and also low fees, because you're also going to look at a building, when you're looking at a building, how renter friendly are there? Some buildings are more renter friendly and sort of the fees. Features, it's going to be, always think of yourself as the renter is the thing I always think of, Shay, first. What else would you put on your list?
So I would say, you want to make sure that that if there is only one bedroom, if it's a king size bed in that bedroom, most tenants these days have a queen or a king size bed. If it's a 2-bedroom, you want to make sure that that second bedroom fits a queen size bed in case they have a roommate situation. So we always tell people minimum 10 by 10 size on that second bedroom, ideally bigger than that. Look to make sure it has good closet space in both bedrooms, because that's always, very important to tenants. And then I would say central AC is a priority for most tenants. In-unit laundry, dishwasher, some sort of parking situation. So either an exterior space, or better than that would be a garage space, and then private outdoor space. That's kind of the gold standard of what tenants are looking for when they come to us and they're looking for a rental property to rent out. So if you can have all of those things, you're going to have a better chance of finding a good tenant, and being able to charge a higher amount for rent. If you can't get all of those things, then we always say, try to get all of them but one. And that's also partly for resale value, because it is much harder for us to resale a property that doesn't have central AC, doesn't have a parking space, doesn't have outdoor space. All of those things keep the value down. So that will help you not only on resale down the road, but also finding a good tenant. So as David said, ideally 2 bedrooms or more. 3 bedrooms are really important right now. Good bedroom sizes, good closet space, nice kitchen, outdoor space, parking, in-unit laundry, dishwasher. That's kind of the list that everybody is looking for. And then if you're going to be in a high-rise building, look at the amenities. Do they have a nice gym? Do they have a nice pool? Oftentimes renters are willing to pay a higher amount in a rental fee for a 1-year lease, especially when they're moving to the city and they're not sure where they want to live, for those kinds of amenities. And particularly, I like Chicago as a rental market because we have such an influx of people coming and going. So I always find it's very easy to find renters in Chicago proper. Whenever I rent my properties there, I usually have 6, 7 people applying for those properties, and I'm able to increase the amount that I'm charging pretty greatly every year, as long as it checks all those boxes. So that brings us to, what are the things I should avoid or be aware of when buying an investment property? So kind of take that list I just gave you and flip it, right? If it doesn't have in-unit laundry, that's going to limit your buyer pool. If it doesn't have a dishwasher, that's really going to limit your buyer pool. So take that list and flip it. But you also have to look at, if you are buying in some sort of condo situation or HOA situation where it's a condo or a townhouse, are there rental restrictions in that building? So oftentimes buildings or townhouse complexes will say only 25% of the units can be rented, or 30%. So you want to make sure that they are well below that cap and that they haven't ever gotten to that cap, because if you're planning to hold on to this as a long-term rental, the last thing you want is they're at that 25% cap and now you can't rent it, you have to sell it, right? So I try to only buy in complexes where there is no rental cap whatsoever, so I don't have to worry about that kind of a situation. Oftentimes too, they'll say that the owner has to live in the property for 2 years before it can be rented out. If you're going to owner occupy, fine. But if you're not going to owner occupy, that kind of a property isn't going to work for you either. If you're buying an Airbnb, or you want to buy an Airbnb, almost every condo building and townhouse complex in the city of Chicago has regulations saying that you cannot short-term Airbnb properties, usually for less than 6 months. So it is very hard to find short-term Airbnb opportunities in the city of Chicago. It's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. So you have to be very patient in order to find those and understand those restrictions in that complex could change, okay? So those are kind of all the things you want to look at. Then you want to look at the investment property in general. So looking at, just like you would if you're gonna buy the property for yourself, how old is the roof? How old are the windows? Are those gonna need to get replaced soon? Is there any major maintenance coming up? If you're buying in a HOA complex, have they had a history of special assessments? How often and how much were those special assessments? It's not uncommon in Chicago for special assessments to be $20,000 to $50,000 in a building if they need to do major work like putting all new windows on the property, right? That is going to completely destroy your investment property numbers. So you really need to get a copy of the meeting minutes, the budget, and look at those kinds of things if you're looking to buy in some sort of HOA complex. David, anything else you want to add to that one?
I just want one thing to throw in there, and maybe we should say in terms of one thing you should be looking for is also public transport. We talked about parking, but a lot of renters don't have vehicles. So if you don't have parking, you're going to want public transport. If you're buying an investment property in the suburbs, it still is important for access to the interstate. Even though people aren't working, maybe working at home now, this may not be forever, and still that's a question. So, you know, it's now people certainly are looking for their work at home situation, but they also want to know if it goes back to that situation, they're going to have options. I mean, when I looked at properties, I actually do my searches based on the neighborhoods I want and a walking radius of public transport. You look at that in terms of rents in the city, that if you did an overlay of easy public transport and rents, it's going to really, really align. I think that's also, you know, with you want a building that definitely has more renters. You don't want a building that's an all renter building. If it's just investors, you tend to get that feeling. During the downturn, there were a lot of buildings that had foreclosures, and investors bought a big chunk of that. And investors don't always want to spend money. So you always want to have a certain percentage of owner occupancy, because it just takes, the buildings tend to be taken care of a little bit better. And the one thing that happens is because what in some of our buildings in Chicago is they've actually been bought out by they've been sold because they've been deconverted, if they're condo buildings, because there were so many owners that were investors. So there are a lot of things to look at. Shay and I will ask all these questions for you for our clients, but we're just kind of giving you the highlights here. Those are.
I think the transportation thing is really important. Most of our buyer clients, when they're looking to buy a property, say they want to be within a 10-minute walk of the L or the Metra if they're in the city, you know, and I think that's the same ratio for tenants typically. So 10, maybe you can push it to 15, 20, but typically people don't want to walk more than 20 minutes to the L in the city because we get cool, frigid temperatures, right? That said, you also don't want to be right on the L line, right? You know, those properties are very hard to rent. They're very hard to sell. They don't appreciate well. So you don't want to be able to hear the L when it goes by or feel the building shake, you know, so it's kind of this sweet spot of probably like far enough away that you're maybe 3, 4, 5-minute walk, but a max of about 15 to 20-minute walk as well. You know, and then as far as neighborhoods, I know, Andy, you had asked in the chat about like neighborhoods, you know, that's really going to be dependent on kind of what you want for a cap rate, what type of tenant you want, you know, do you want amenities nearby for that tenant? You know, I would say the neighborhoods that tend to be most popular for tenants are the ones that have a lot of things for people to walk to. So shops, restaurants, proximity to the lake, you know, so a lot of people want to live in, you know, Lincoln Park, Lakeview, Wicker Park, you know, think of all the places that have shops and restaurants, West Loop, right? Those things where they have that walkability is really popular with tenants, especially as David said, because some of them don't have cars. So,
and you know, a lot of millennials, you know, they do not have cars. I mean, you look at sort of because there's definitely a generational shift in terms of not rushing to ownership. So people are definitely renting a lot longer. So looking at those sort of amenities, you especially look at, you know, we're talking about neighbors. We talked about rental restrictions. One of the things we always have people look at leasing fees. A lot of buildings will charge you because that's their revenue source. There are buildings that will last $400 or $500 a year for your lease. So I think we've covered most of the big rental restrictions that people will encounter.
One more thing would be to decide if you want to have pets allowed in your property or not. And then if you decide that you really want people to have dogs, does that building allow tenants or that complex to have pets? Because some of the buildings will allow owner occupants to have pets, but they will not allow tenants to have pets. So, you know, I personally, I'm a huge dog and cat lover. I don't love having pets in my rental properties. You know, they do tend to cause a lot of damage. So if I'm going to allow pets, I typically charge like a $450 one-time pet fee. And then I charge a $25 per month per pet fee on top of the rent to help cover some of that potential damage. But, you know, I had one client's property, it wasn't mine. The tenant had cats and the cat peed everywhere. And it was $15,000 to fix it because we had to take up all the floors that were damaged, put down all new drywall, all new flooring. It was a mess, right? So, you know, think about what do you want to allow your tenants to have, and then check the restrictions for that complex to make sure that it works with what you want to have as well. All right, so that brings us to our last question. When's the best time to buy an investment property? David, do you want to take this one?
Sure. The rental market in Chicagoland, it tends, used to be very much tied to the school calendar. It still is generally guided by that. So you look at sort of prime rental months are May through September. And you look at April and October sort of as part of that. I'd say probably 70% of rentals, 85% or 80% of rentals go in that way. People want to move in the summertime. It's just a better time to move. People, you look at younger or people getting out of school, they're going to be looking at that point. They're starting new jobs. So that's where you're going to have the highest demand and can also get the highest rent just because you have competition. Because if you have a property that really is sort of turnkey, you've got a 2-bed, 2-bath, it's updated, it's in a good location, you can have, if you're within the realm of a properly priced rent, you can have multiple applicants and sometimes it can go over. I mean, that definitely happens if you bought a property in that case. So you want to be ideally on that rent cycle. So if you're doing that, buying in the springtime is a really good time to purchase. It also depends if you have tenants in the property right now. You might be looking at a property right now, they renewed everyone in September of last year. The nice thing is if you purchase it now, you're hopefully not going to have to deal with that. You'll be able to get to know your property, any outside improvements you might need to do. This is obviously for a multifamily or single family property. You'll be able to do that, the work in the summer, and you also have a little bit of time to do that. Any work you want to do, we just want to emphasize, give yourself 3 times the amount of time you might have historically gotten to do that. So, and just remember, contract to close is actually about 30 to 60 days. So if you go under contract today, sort of normally you're going to expect to close in February into March. So if you're starting your search right now, looking for a couple months, with that, you're already looking right now at sort of closing in May, or June, so it's going to tie in really well. We've actually got a couple more questions on here. I went beyond our 10 here, Shay.
No worries. So I try to get all of my tenants on a June 1st rental renewal cycle. So if I buy a property where the tenant's lease ends in September, when I renew them the next time, I will either only renew them through that June, or I'll do like a 1.5-year lease so that I always end their lease May 31st. And I always end the lease May 31st at noon. And I start the next tenant's lease June 1st at noon. So I have a 24-hour time period between the tenants to get everything ready for the next tenant. So in Chicago, you have to get the locks changed. You're going to probably need to do some touch-up painting, get the property cleaned, all of those kinds of things. So, if you can close in the spring and then get somebody in for a June 1st rental cycle, that's definitely the best time to do it. Tenants have to give you 60 days notice if they are on a yearly lease. If they're just month to month, it's 30 days notice. So you're going to typically want to start showing properties for rent about 60 days ahead of time. So if you close, say, March, you do showings right away, you're probably looking at getting a new tenant in there about June 1st. So how do I find good tenants, right? So what you're going to want to do, we can put it in the MLS for you if you want to use us. I typically tell our clients it's pretty easy to find renters. Don't use us to help you rent a property out. You can do it on your own. So put it on Zillow. That's really the best place to find tenants, along with Craigslist. Those are my 2 best places to find tenants. You can also put it on Domu. Craigslist, I think, costs you $5 every time you advertise it. Domu is like $35 for the week. What I find is you have to put it on multiple times on Craigslist. So we typically put it on once a day or twice a day on Craigslist. Zillow, you just put it on once. And Domu, you just put it on for a certain number of weeks and they charge you based on the number of weeks. You're going to want to really screen your tenants well. So like we have a program that our company uses a third-party vendor to do background screening of tenants. We're happy to hook you up with that program free of charge. The tenants for that program pay a $60 application fee. It does an incredibly thorough background check. It checks Social Security to make sure they're not using a fraudulent name or Social Security number. It does employment verification. So it calls their employer to make sure they're actually employed and making the amount of money they say they're making. It calls their past landlord to make sure that they were in good standing with that person, paying the rent on time, and that that person would renew their lease. And it also checks their credit. Okay. Otherwise, if you don't want to go through like our third party, you can also do that online through Zillow. I think it's a little cheaper on Zillow. It's like $30 or $35 for the tenants, for each tenant to apply. And they do something similar. They don't follow up, as far as I know, with the landlord and the employer. So that's the piece I like through ours better. But they do a good job as well. And there are other services you can use as well. For me, I always set minimums that I want my tenants to have before I will consider them. So I want a 680 minimum credit score for everybody 18 or older living in the property. And I want household income to be at least 3 times the monthly rent. So those are kind of my 2 minimums. I also say no smoking in the property. You can't say no smokers because that's discriminatory, but you can say that you're not going to allow smoking in the actual property. So that's the criteria I set for my tenants. I don't know, David, if you have anything else to add to that.
I mean, the way I want to answer the question is I just want to say the way I answer, how do you find good tenants, is being by thorough and also being careful. Because one thing we haven't really touched on is sort of the legality of being a landlord. In Chicago, we have pretty, pro-tenant rules in the Chicago residential landlord tenant ordinance. And there are a lot of guidelines you need to go by in terms of doing this. They're not that difficult if you follow the rules, but you always need to be in compliance with fair housing legislation and regulations. Good, sensible common sense, you tend to avoid sort of things like this. But like as Shay said, if you set up guidelines ahead of time that you need to have a 680 credit score, that sort of thing. But going through, being thorough, making sure that you hear from the landlord. One of the greatest tricks I've used in the past is you don't call just the current landlord, you call the landlord before. Because if you have someone who's in a bad situation right now, their landlord wants them out. If you call the landlord before, they're probably more likely to be honest with you and sort of give you an assessment. So just be thorough, and be fair and be consistent.
The consistency part is key, right? If you're going to say it has to have a minimum of 680 credit score, you have to stick to that with all tenants. You cannot then accept a tenant who has a 660 credit score. You can be accused of fair housing violations at that point. So if you are going to stick to standards, you have to stick to those standards for all the applicants. David, do you want to take this next question?
Sure. Should I hire a property management company to manage the property? Our favorite answer here today is it depends. If you hire a property management company, you're usually paying probably between 7 and 10% a month of your monthly income to deal with that. And the services can vary. If you're dealing with a property in a condominium, that probably is not as necessary. Even if you're not local and you're in a larger building, one of the things you're paying for in your premium with higher assessments is that you're probably going to be able to get the super to do work. They'll generally charge you for things, but it's probably cheaper than if you have a basic plumbing thing, like a new, you need to have a new wax ring on a toilet. They might charge $50, $100. A plumber might charge $250 to come out. Because the one thing about management companies is they have people on call to do these things, but you pay a big premium for that. So if you're out of town, you're in another area and you have a single family, you probably should, because you're going to need someone to do that. They also, depending on some service places just manage the property, some also do the leasing. Obviously, in that point, there are additional fees that you're going to be paying in terms of that, and you're going to want to work that into your numbers. So the question, I think the question is, it's going to depend on your situation. It's going to depend on sort of and also how the numbers work for you.
I would add to that, typically in the Chicagoland area, if the property management company or a realtor is going to rent the property out for you, they're charging 1 month's rental fee. So if you're charging $3,000 a month, that first month's rent of $3,000 is going to go to the property manager or realtor representing you. Half of that usually goes to that person, half of it goes to the realtor representing the tenant. And then sometimes there's like $100 administrative fee or something like that. So you have to factor that amount into your net calculations if you're going to use a property manager or a realtor to rent the property out for you as well. So that was kind of everything that we were going to go over. We hope we answered all of your questions. If we did not, please feel free to put any additional questions in the chat box. Otherwise, you are welcome to email us, call us, text us anytime. We love talking investment properties. So we'd be happy to talk with you about it anytime with any additional questions that you have. We will be posting a copy of these slides on our Facebook page, which is the Buy, Sell, Love Chicago team. We will also be emailing them out to you along with a recording of this class so you can listen to it again. But again, if you have particular questions about your situation, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. David, do you want to add anything else?
No, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We've covered a lot, and I think we're going to take a breath at this point. But I think however you end up looking at it, you want to be sure that when you have good partners in terms of your realtor when helping look for a property, your lender who's going to work with you, and also your accountant, because taxes make a big difference in all of this, and they can make a property work that you might not think would otherwise, and vice versa. And there are just a lot of aspects. And this is sort of, as you're looking at your taxes this time of year, it's sort of a great time to think, this might be a good time to add. So, but yeah, we will be happy to answer any follow-up questions and go into more depth on any of these topics, because there's a lot of info we're happy to share.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a great day, and be in touch if you need anything. Thanks, everybody. Bye.